Pine Bush Discovery Center, along with interviewing an expert about the Albany Pine Bush and its history. After the video, you will be handed a short worksheet to complete. It'll be about the stuff we learned in the lesson today. It also checked in for me to know that you paid attention. In class, we've already discussed some important environmental reasons of why we protect the pine bush. One of those reasons is that the environment here hosts about 20 rare animal and plant species. Follow me and we'll explore the center. Hi everybody, this is Erin. This is who I'm going to be interviewing today.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm the Education Program Director here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve.
Nice to meet you. Thank you again for having
welcome.
me. My first question is, who lived in the Albany Pine Bush?
Well, it depends on how far back in time you go. If you look thousands of years ago, there's evidence that people have been in the Albany Pine Bush for about 8,000 years.
Oh, wow.
So a long time.
Yeah.
Based on artifacts that have been found and dated, we know that there were people living here as far back as 8,000 years. But in more recent history, looking at pre-contact time in the early 1600s, late 1500s, both the Mohawk of the Iroquois and the Mohican utilized the Albany Pine Bush area, what we think of as the Pine Bush today. But it's not believed that either nation of peoples had any permanent settlements here. It was more that they would come into this area, they would hunt here, and they would use it for gathering food, but they never actually had any permanent settlements.
So there's no, is there any visible signs in the Albany Pine Bush today that we have seen these Iroquois nations or other Native Americans?
There are pieces that they've left behind, whether they're points, arrowheads, that type of thing, any kind of artifacts that people can find. Those are evidence.
Large settlements, like where they lived.
Right. And so they don't. Archaeologists and anthropologists don't believe that this area was really settled until much more recent times. So the early settlers to this area, the early European settlers in this area, were the Dutch. And the Dutch came up the Hudson River and they established a trading outpost pretty much near where present-day Albany is. And they constructed a fort in that area, Fort Orange. And then they would come out into the Pine Bush and they would trade with the Native Americans here. So they would also hunt. Here, this shows one of the rifles that may have been used a long time ago in the Albany Pine Bush area for hunting or defense purposes, but even today that's a use that still continues in the pine bush, is hunting and trapping. But they were mostly looking for animal pelts, and the beaver was the most prized because of its use back in the Netherlands in the manufacturing of hats. So they hunted different animals, and they would trade with Native Americans in the area, both the Mohawk and the Mohican, and they would give them things that they couldn't otherwise come by here, like cloth or copper pots, some glass beads, and in exchange they would get the animal pelts, and then they would send back to the Netherlands for manufacturing of clothing and hats and that kind of thing.
Are there any other resources that the Pine Bush has that offer to both the Native Americans and the European settlers that they used?
Yes, well, definitely what people could use from the animals, whether it was food or their fur, was a primary thing that they were looking for. But also, certainly, the trees that grew here and that still grow here today, the pitch pine. So this shows a piece of wood. This is actually a really old pitch pine. It was one of the stockade posts that surrounded Fort Orange in the very early settlement of Albany. And in this picture down at the bottom, this shows somebody harvesting pitch from a pine tree as part of that industry. Actually, the pitch was also used for turpentine. And also the pitch pine, the sap is really sticky. That's part of where the name pitch pine comes from. Pine sap's sticky to begin with, but the pitch pine, I guess, is especially sticky. And people would harvest it, and they would use it down at the Port of Albany where they used to manufacture boats. And they would seal the hulls of the boats with the pitch pine, the resin, and when it dried, it was very hard, and it would prevent water from getting into the wood. So there was a very brief pitch harvesting industry for a little while. Also, sand was used later on, more in the mid-1800s, in the manufacturing of glass. There was what was called the Glass House. It was a glass making factory basically in the town of Guilderland.
Oh, wow.
On where Foundry Road is today, which is off of Route 20 down in near Route 146. And the glass house, they would manufacture glass using the sand from the Albany pine bush. So that was another big resource that the pine bush provided. You can see some of the uses of sand in the Albany pine bush. On the left are some cast iron bookends, and the sand was used to line the casts, the molds, that they would pour the iron into and cast those shapes. And the sand was prized for that use. Certainly there were local people that understood that the pine bush is full of blueberries. There were a lot of people that would go out and gather bushelfuls of blueberries and huckleberries when they were in season. So that was a big thing that people took out of the area. The pine bush also provided a transportation corridor, and it was a way for people to get from present-day Albany to present-day Schenectady, whether it was for trade or military purposes or just general travel from the east to the west and back and forth again.
And are there any certain specific, I read about the King's Highway. Is
Yes.
that one of those?
Yes, yep, that was really the first major transportation corridor that was utilized by the early European settlers in this area. And later on, the Western Turnpike, which we know as Route 20, and another turnpike, which we know as Central Avenue, Route 5, became more popular and used, and the King's Highway fell into wasn't really used much anymore. But for a good period of time, the King's Highway was a major roadway, bringing people from Albany to Schenectady and back again. The road actually originated as it was part of the Mohawk Path, which was a footpath, really no wider than a person, that went pretty much, as far as I understand, across the state of New York, because the Iroquois stretched all the way across New York State. And so the section that was in this area was then later, as the Europeans came to settle this area, they would use it, and then it was widened so that it could accommodate wagons. There was a stagecoach line that would go along the King's Highway. There's a lot of stories about characters along the King's Highway, but certain entrepreneurs of the time set up businesses along the King's Highway to attract travelers and to provide them with things that they need along the way, whether it was a place to stay or food, drink, that kind of thing. So there were a couple of taverns that sprung up along the King's Highway. They were looking for evidence of a tavern, and these are remnants of some clay pipes that were found at the tavern, and also some salt glazed stoneware, part of a teacup down at the bottom there. So these are all things that you would have found at the taverns, people relaxing, taking a break. And that photograph shows one of the Truax taverns that none of the taverns are still standing today. But that was, I think that photo was maybe from the 1960s or so.
Do you know if the Albany pine bush played any other role in the Dutch settling in Albany specifically? Because obviously the environment is so unique, like you said, the pitch pine, all that stuff doesn't really grow in other places. Did that have a reason why they settled here and, for Orange and then now Albany?
If you go back and you read some of the notes that people wrote in their diaries and their journals about the pine bush, some people loved it and thought it was amazing, and other people hated it. And there was this one passage that is really humorous, and this person says that not even a diseased dog should be allowed to die there. It's so terrible. So this person apparently really hated it, but I think as people over time came to understand what was here, and certainly again those people that knew that they could use the sand for glass making, the berries, the pitch, people found things that they could use here.
Were there any other types of transportation that went through the Albany pine bush? I know we talked about the King's Highway.
Right, yes. The first steam engine, the first steam locomotive to go through New York State went right through the pine bush. And it was pretty much a small engine with stagecoach cars linked to the back of it. And it was called, that engine was called the DeWitt Clinton. It was one of the early. So in this display case, there are two pieces of the original Mohawk Hudson line, that railroad that went through the Albany pine bush that the DeWitt Clinton rode on. So those are just a couple pieces of that. And that's a painting that was done that showed the DeWitt Clinton. So you can see, you can't really see the engine because it's chopped off in that picture, but you can see the lineup of the stagecoach cars. And to see an original painting of the DeWitt Clinton, you can go to the Albany Institute of History and Art and see that. It really was a very important transportation corridor, and even in the times of the Revolutionary War, it was used as a means to move soldiers from one area to another, and there are stories that General George Washington went through the pine bush along the King's Highway.
Were there different ways the settlers used the Albany pine bush? We talked about the different resources they find. How about farming or any
Yes,
of those types?
right. People did farm here, and actually today there are still some farms in existence in the pine bush. There are certain crops that don't do as well here because of the sand, but supposedly root vegetables do very well here in the loose sandy soil. So depends on what people wanted to farm, how successful they were. But a lot of people did establish farms here. And the Rapp Road community, which was established just off of what we think of as Washington Avenue Extension today, established some farms in that area too, and some orchards and some areas where they grew fruit crops. So there was that use as well.
Good.